U.S. companies are hoping for some relief from the tariffs that are hitting both sides of the Pacific. Let me turn to Dan Ikenson in our Washington studio. He's the Director of Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, also an expert on international trade. Dan, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Stakes are high, a lot of expectation on these talks. What is the realistic outcome here?
Well, there's a couple different schools of thought. Some of the U.S. negotiators really have their eyes on the U.S. stock market, on the U.S. economy, are looking for some transactions that are going to make the trade war go away. Other negotiators, I think, are thinking more long-term. There are real structural issues that they're demanding that China make of the Chinese economy. It depends on whose ear, who has Trump's ear, because he's going to ultimately make a decision as to whether or not this is, agreements to purchase more agriculture, more energy products, to open up more markets in China is good enough. But we'll see.
Trump says the Chinese economy not doing well, and that gives Beijing a reason to work toward a deal. Do you agree with that?
That's certainly true, but there's an interdependence here as well. The U.S. economy is beginning to feel the pain as well. A lot of U.S. farmers have lost market share. A lot of U.S. manufacturers who rely on imported intermediate goods to produce their products are running into difficulties. American companies that produce or assemble in China are running into difficulties. And the president certainly has his eyes on the stock market and the U.S. economy as well. So we're both, in bad shape here. And the longer this goes on, the more pain will be inflicted on both economies.
The U.S. says this is about intellectual property theft, unfair trade practices, market access. And up until this point, Dan, the two sides have not been able to make any headway. So what is different this time that makes us perhaps a little bit more optimistic, if you will, that they can meet somewhere in the middle? What has changed?
Well, I think there's growing evidence of the interdependence of our economies. We saw last week Apple issue warnings about its profits, renewed guidance. I mean, Apple famously, it says on the back of their products, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China. It's the quintessential representation of the interrelatedness of our economies. And so nobody wants to sink each other's economy or the global economy. And I think that the evidence is coming forward.
Do you think the U.S. economy is strong enough to withstand a lingering trade war?
Well, it certainly wouldn't help to have it going on, but I would say the United States is not as exposed to international trade as other economies are. I think that the U.S., 27% of the U.S. economy is imports and exports, whereas 37% of the Chinese economy is imports and exports. Globally, the average is about 53%. So both economies are not as exposed to trade, but both economies are anchors in the global economy. So if this continues to keep churning, other economies are going to suffer as well. The global economy is going to contract, and it's going to be a real mess, a real difficult situation to climb out of.
With China and U.S. being the two biggest economies in the world, what's going to happen, Dan, if there is no headway this time around, if there's no progress by their self-imposed March 1st deadline?
Well, technically, we will see tariffs rise. The United States has imposed duties on imports from China, $250 billion worth. The first $50 billion are currently subject to 25% duties. The next $200 billion are currently subject to 10%. That's going to go up to 25%. That's a significant amount, something like $50 billion extra in duties collected. It's going to cause U.S. and other Western companies to give serious consideration to shifting their supply chains, to repatriating their supply chains. That's something I think that Lighthizer, the USTR, Peter Navarro, economic advisor, would like to see. They'd like to see this sort of revamping. But I'm not sure that they recognize that the short-term costs are going to be something that Trump and Mnuchin and Kudlow are not going to want to have to deal with. And I think the Chinese are thinking the same way about that. They don't want to have to deal with these short-term interruptions to the economy. I think that there's a lot of dissent actually within China that maybe President Xi is taking the wrong trajectory here and possibly disrupting the path to China's rise.
And you also got to wonder if there's dissent within President Trump's, even among their close advisors, where there's disagreement on how to handle this trade war with China, with some wanting some kind of resolution and some wanting to play perhaps a tougher game. Dan Ikenson, thank you so much.
Pleasure.